I don't know if Jens is aware of this, but he gave this presentation at the League's national meeting in Dayton, Ohio, and his presentation was the talk of the meeting. I don't know if you picked that up, but as you went around, say during meal times and breaks and so on, people were really talking about that presentation. So it was really something. I'm going to follow on and pick up some of the points that Jens was making and try and shed a little bit more light on them. For the person who asked what the plane was, that's the Brigade 14. That is an image that Michael Neal let me use from one of his paintings. You'll find that I like to use paintings to depict aircraft in talks more often than photographs, because for one thing they're in color, they're nicer to look at, but also sometimes you get a better view of an airplane in a painting, because if you look at a photograph, usually everything under the top wing is in shadow. It's hard to see it in a lot of cases, but artists tend to make it so you can see what you're looking at. And so there's a lot of advantages to using paintings.
Thank you, Mike.
Yes, thank you, Mike. Okay, so Jen's thesis, which I'm paraphrasing here, is the contribution of aerial bombing on the battlefield, even when it is a success, is not understood by friendly ground forces or historians because it is not seen. You like the picture? I love that picture. Dud in the mud. Okay, here's a photo of Brigade 13. So, so my proposal, Brigade 14, thank you. My proposal is that with further study, the bomb raids of the French Premier Brigade Aviation, the 1st Aerial Brigade, in the summer of 1918, may provide an example of a successful but underappreciated bombing campaign. The 1st Aerial Brigade's records have been placed on the web by the French government, along with a lot of other war diaries of various aircraft units, fighters, bombers, reconnaissance, airships even. They've been placed on the web. They're very nicely scanned in images. These particular reports are very thorough. They are daily reports. They are typed, which is very nice, not handwritten. And they are mostly complete. There's a few gaps in the reports, and I'm going to talk in a little while about why there are some gaps there. And the reports for the 1st Aerial Brigade run from the 20th of June to the 5th of October, 1918. Okay, so we're going to talk about one particular campaign, aerial bombing campaign, in August 1918. But first, there's a bunch of background that I have to give you so you sort of understand the context of how we got to that point and what's going on. An important part of that is that French bombing up through 1917 was hitting a lot of strategic targets, things far away from the battlefield. But starting in October 1917, the British created what later came to be known as the Independent Force, or the Independent Air Force. They were based in the city of Nancy, where they were close to Germany itself, not just German-occupied territory, but close to Germany itself. And they started with 3 squadrons, flying missions and doing strategic bombing. They were going after industrial targets, things like that. By the time of the armistice, this was up to 9 squadrons. It was never a very large force. But they were hitting a lot of the things that the French had been hitting earlier. And that gave the French the opportunity to use their air force to batter the German army directly. The British were flying at night. The squadrons were about evenly split between daytime squadrons and nighttime squadrons. At night they were flying the giant Handley Page bombers. They were also flying the FE-2Bs. The FE-2Bs, you'll remember, were were mainly targets used by the Germans in Bloody April 1917. They were quite obsolete by that time. So they stopped using them as fighters, but these planes actually soldiered on as night bombers until August 1918. For their daytime raids, they had one squadron of de Havilland DH-4s, and the other 2 or 3 squadrons were de Havilland DH-9s. By the armistice, they had conducted about 750 squadron raids against rail targets, German airfields, chemical and munitions plants, chemical, translation, poison gas, and blast furnaces, and reprisal raids against cities. The creation of the independent force in late 1917 was in direct response to the German bombing of London with Gotha bombers from occupied Belgium that took place in the summer of 1917. So this was their chance for revenge for the bombing of British cities. It was also their chance to hit industrial targets that might have kind of an outsize effect than just bombing troops. That was the idea behind it. Okay, the next bit of background. The United States was commonly referred to as the arsenal of democracy in World War II. France was the arsenal of democracy in World War I. The French provided aircraft to every single Allied Air Force. They produced more aircraft than any other nation by the end of the war. With the demise of the German Air Force after the armistice and the disbanding of the German Air Force, France was definitely the country that had the largest Air Force in the world for a few years after 1918. Continuing with the theme of the arsenal of democracy, France's production of airplanes and aero engines, very important, was increasing throughout the entire war. It really took off throughout 1917 and 1918. This allowed them to create a huge increase in their bomber force. In just the short time between the summer of 1917 and May 1918, they doubled the number of bombardment groups that they had created from 5 to 10. Much of this increase was the Brigade 14 B-2 day bombers, which first appeared in late 1917. This painting is from the Battle of Conflans. You actually saw aerial photographs in the last talk of Conflans with the roundhouse and the explosive Red Cross tents. Mike O'Neill did that painting for me, and this is a detail of that showing one of the Brigade 14s. The airplane itself, by November 1918, the French produced about 4,600 of these aircraft. They had 2 versions, like most two-seaters in World War I. There were 2 versions of them. There was a reconnaissance version and a bomber version. And they produced both versions with the majority being reconnaissance airplanes. These were very fast aircraft. They could go at 106 miles an hour at 10,000 feet. When they first introduced these planes in late 1917, at high altitude, German fighters couldn't catch them. And so for a short time, they flew them even without machine guns to defend them. Those happy times ended, and pretty soon they got smart and had to put machine guns on their planes to protect them. But they were fast enough that for a short time they could get away without defenses. They were very powerful aircraft. They flew with a 300 horsepower engine, and they could carry 563 pounds of bombs. To give you a perspective, this plane replaced the 2-seater French-produced version of the Sopwith 1.5 strutter. The 2-seater 1.5 strutter had an engine of 130 horsepower, and it could carry 88 pounds of bombs. So this was a tremendous increase in the bomb load that a single French day bomber could carry. You can get an idea of the bombs. The two people there are the Pemmerimhoff brothers, who were flying in one of the squadrons of the First Aero Brigade.
It was BR-123.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I did not know that. Oh, I forgot to mention, last point, those planes, when they flew in formation, they defended themselves well in formation. Because they could fly together, and they were fairly good for a two-seat bomber, which are much slower than fighters, of defending themselves against German fighter attacks.
Which is why a few appear in my bomb races book.
Okay, now, the problem with inviting a statistician to come speak to you is that I'm generally not content with just making sweeping statements. I read this here, I think this is what's going on. I actually try to look at the data and try to figure out, is it really true? So it turns out that my impression was that the switch to tactical bombing and the increases in numbers and capabilities of bombers created a massive force for attacking the German army directly. That was my impression, based on things I've read. So I started looking at data to see, does this make sense? Is this really true? And I have a database of bombing raids on the Western Front. I have over 3,000 records of individual French raids alone. So that I have a very rich database. And so I can look at some of this stuff. So I took summer 1917, June, July, and August, and compared it to the experience in summer 1918. And what I found was that out of all the different types of targets that they were bombing, strategic, factories, things like that, bombing troops directly, they were spending 18% of their sorties in the summer of 1917 directly attacking the German army. A year later, that went up to 58% of their sorties. Huge increase, a huge change in emphasis. As I said earlier, the number of bombardment groups was doubled from 5 to 10 by the increases in French production. Between the summer of 1918 and the summer of 1917 and the summer of 1918, the bomb weight, average bomb weight carried by an individual plane, day bombers or night bombers, increased more than doubled from 267 pounds to 640 pounds per airplane. So you've got not only increases in aircraft, but big increases in what they can carry. I'm phrasing the last point very carefully here. This is not the type of statement you would make to a bunch of academics for a peer-reviewed journal. Because all I have is partial data, and I don't necessarily have a statistically valid random sample, but I have a lot of data. And so I'm fairly confident that even if these numbers aren't exactly right, they sort of move in the right direction. By looking at the experiences in the two summers, 1917 and 1918, the Aviation Militaire was able to increase its total number of sorties 7 times, 7-fold over that year, and its bomb weight increased 18-fold by adding planes, adding carrying capability, things like that.
Total bomb weight of all the airplanes.
Total bomb weight of all the airplanes, of all the bombs dropped in the summer of 1918,
Yeah.
was 18 times higher. Okay. And that's got to be rough. It's, as I said, it's not a statistically valid sample, but it gives you a sense of just how they've created this huge air force to use for battering the German army directly. Okay, the 1st Aerial Brigade I'm going to describe what it did in what the French call the Battle of the Santerre, their work in August 1918. The 1st Aero Brigade consisted of one big unit of fighter planes, SPADs, and one big unit of bombers, Brigade Day bombers. Escadre 1, let me back up a bit. You all know that the word escadrille in French means squadron, okay? The terms that they use for larger and larger organizations, group, escadre, escadron, groupement, all of these things are actually naval terms for different units. And so we're looking at very large groups of planes when we talk about an escadre. Escadre number 1, fighter planes, all SPAD fighters. They had 3 combat groups in it, and nominally, when everyone was at full strength, they had 216 fighters, all under one person's control, all directed to the same target or set of targets on the same day. For bombers, the brigade bombers, they had Escadre 12. They had 3 bombardment groups, nominally 135 bombers, all headed to the same target, often the same target as the SPADs are going after. They also had 2 escadrilles of Caudron R-11s, which were bomber escorts to protect the bombers. And I'm going to talk about them more presently. The brigade was named for its commandant, Louis de Gois, who was a French bombing pioneer, starting very early in the war. He had a very interesting life. He was captured in one of France's first strategic bombardment raids in May 1915, attacking the poison gas factories on the Rhine at Ludwigshafen. He and his pilot had engine trouble, and so they went down behind German lines. He made 7 attempts to escape captivity and finally escaped the Germans on the 8th attempt in November 1917. To do that, he traveled 800 kilometers across Germany to get out and escape. So quite an amazing individual. The 1st Aerial Brigade supported different French armies depending on what needed to be done on a particular day. So they were actually a very flexible unit. From this point on, I'm really going to refer to them just by the designation for the bombing group, the 12th Escadre. This is the battlefield that we are looking at. This is very dynamic. The green line there is the front line on the 9th of August. The double blue line is the front line on the 25th of August. So the Germans are falling back. Also, you've got, just for reference, you've got Paris down here, the city of Meaux here, which is now about a 45-minute drive outside of Paris. Wonderful World War I museum there. Fairly new, it's only 5 years old, something like that. Probably some of you have been to Chateau Thierry here on the Marne River. Chateau Thierry was the farthest extent of the German advance in mid-July 1918. So this is very dynamic. The Germans were here on mid-July. They were up to here on the 9th of August, and then moved back even further on the 25th. All right, so you're going to see the same map again and again. The 12th Escadre was based right here. Here's the scale of miles.
It's up in the left, you'll notice Amiens,
Yes.
where at that time the British are giving the Germans their black day.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes. Which was just the day before the green line was the front line. So the German army is falling back rapidly by World War I standards. Okay, so the first thing we're going to look at is the 9th of August, 1918. The 12th Escadre is doing one bombing raid, and they are dropping bombs between 3 o'clock and 3:30 in the afternoon. And they are targeting troops in this ravine here, in the Avra River ravine, just behind the front lines. There were 76 brigade bombers that took place, that took part in this raid. By World War I standards, this is a massive bombing raid. This is very large, all going against the same target. They dropped about 19 tons of bombs and fired about 6,500 rounds at German troops. This is not shooting at other airplanes, this is just shooting at troops on the ground. On the next day, this is where we were on the 9th. On the next day, they're doing two raids. One is at 12:30 in the afternoon, and the other is at 4:45 in the afternoon. They are targeting troops in the Avra Corps woods, around here, one of those two stars, I can't remember which. They are attacking troops at Shawnee and Lassigny, which is up here. And they're also attacking a convoy, that's right, it was this one. They're attacking a convoy here that's running in this direction. They are also striking the rail station at Am. You can see the rail lines. There's not a lot of rail lines in here, so hitting the one rail target is very important for cutting German supplies coming to the front lines. They dropped 22, this time they had 92 brigade sorties. Remember I said 76 was a lot for World War I. 92 in one day, on the 10th of August, dropping about 22 tons of bombs and firing 4,000 rounds at troops. The next day, they have two raids, one at 11:15 in the morning and the other at just before 7 o'clock in the evening, where these triangles are. They were hitting troops in Guiscar, which is up here, Pocaricourt, which is in here, and they were also striking a convoy that was running from Bahrain to Genvry, I guess, which is Jean Revy, thank you, which is running in here. They have, I think it was 124 brigade sorties. I put the question mark there because the records say there were 62 in the morning and 62 in the evening, and I'm an intelligence analyst. I don't believe in coincidences. That might be just a data error. But anyway, they were dropping 27 tons of bombs, so maybe it really was 124 sorties. And during the course of these battles, 4 brigade crews were lost. Let's see. So they were flying from here at Escadre 12. At the same time, you also have Escadre 13, which was based here. It's another escadre with brigade day bombers, is attacking Noyon, which is here. Okay, so you have other units also attacking this. Okay, this is the 11th of August. All right, we're now taking a break until the 20th of August. After the 11th of August, Escadre 12 was in training. I'm not sure what that means, but that's what the records say. They were in training, or they were waiting in reserve for orders to attack something. And so they weren't doing any attacking between the 11th and the 20th. There were night bombers also attacking a lot of these targets and targets farther out. The night bombers had longer legs than the day bombers, and so they would use them to attack targets that were farther out. Okay, one more point. The 3 days we've been looking at, the 9th, 10th, and 11th, when the 12th Escadre was striking all of these targets, they were doing so in support of the French 1st Army and 3rd Army, which were in this area and attacking. In the next slide, we're looking at the 12-day period from the 20th to the 31st of August. And at this point, they're supporting the French 10th Army. As I said, the 1st Brigade is a unit that is helping out whichever French army needs help. All right? So, instead of taking you through it day by day, we're going to look at the whole thing as a unit, because if you start to map these things, you've got overlapping bombing areas, and it's just a mess, so it's easier to look at it as a group. So, from the 20th to the 31st, they're attacking primarily troops, places where troops are camped, and they're now working in the Ailette River Valley area. This is an area that has rail lines, it has roads, and a waterway. At that point, the Ailette River is actually a canal. So all of this is very important for the movement of troops in support of the German front line. Their targets on this day, although they were primarily attacking troops directly, they were also hitting 2 railroad stations and a bridge that crosses a canal south of Anisy-le-Chateau, which is here. So you've got one rail line coming down here to support the German troops on the front lines here, just north of Soissons. They're attacking this rail line at 2 different rail stations on that line. Okay, next slide, you're going to see the same picture, different text. During this 12-day period, they were flying almost 600 brigade sorties, and they were dropping about 130 pounds of bomb, 130 tons of bombs. Previously, I've been giving you exact numbers. Okay, they flew exactly this many sorties, they dropped exactly this many pounds of bombs. These numbers are estimates now because some of the reports are missing. It turns out that in my book, you find very good information on what was happening on the days that the reports were missing. In fact, René Martel, who wrote this book in 1939, quotes some of these reports that are no longer in the French archives. My hero, René Martel, took the reports from the French archives and did not return them. So, which was not very nice, because I really wanted different data than what he wrote about. But anyway, you've got these bombers. They're being protected by small groups of Quadrone R-11s, and at one time they were on one mission. They were being protected also at the same time by a large number of Spads from the 15th Combat Group, French. During this time, apparently 4 brigade crews were lost during this 12-day period, which is pretty damn good for day bombers. Let's see. During this time period, Escadre 13, another group of day bombers, is also hitting about the same targets. And Escadre 14, which I didn't look up where they were based, were flying night missions against some of the same targets, and some of those targets farther out. Escadre 14 was flying Voisin bombers, and they were the Voisin bombers like the Voisin 8 that's at the Air and Space Museum downtown. Okay, so that's kind of the meat of this. There are some more details that I want to give you to sort of flesh out the picture. But this is the area where the bombing took place, behind the front lines, which may turn out to be a good case for air power making a difference in the ground battle. The Quadrone R-11s were protecting the bombers. These are three-seater bomber escorts. They had a pilot and a gunner in front and a gunner behind. And they used the best gunners from the Chateau gunnery school that the French had. They flew close-in protection for the brigades. Sometimes they were on the side of the bombers, sometimes slightly above, sometimes both. If they used the Spads would fly higher up, top cover, and sometimes they would be way out in front, sweeping for German interceptors. Most of the raids used only a small number of quadrones. You'd get something like, you'd have 75 or 95 bombers, and you'd have 9 quadrones protecting them. But they did their job very well. As you saw, there were very few bomber losses, even though these were bombers attacking during the day. There was a very high rate of escorts lost. You might get on a particular mission, there's 9 quadrones flying, and 2 of them are lost. Okay? It's a very high percentage. The picture of the Quadrone R-11 is from over the front, spring 2008, and it's a Mike O'Neill painting. The Quadrone crews were based on the same airfields as the bomber crews, intentionally. And so there was a real camaraderie between them. The Quadrone crews were real fire eaters. They would go in, and anytime German planes appeared, they would put themselves between the German planes and the bombers. So they were really very tenacious, and unfortunately paid the price for it. Okay, other details. We've been looking at August 1918. There is one other good case, perhaps an even better case, for air power being successful in pursuing the ground war. I've put in here the extent, roughly, of the German occupation up through the Battle of the Marne, the farthest they got in mid-July 1918. When the Germans tried to get across the Marne River, they got a few troops across on pontoon bridges and then had to stop because the French Air Force was destroying the pontoon bridges and attacking the Germans. In fact, once they got a few troops across, the Germans decided they'd better pull them back because they couldn't support them. They were just small, isolated units, and they had to wait until the conditions were right so they could pull them back so they could join the rest of the German army in the retreat up to here 3 weeks later. I didn't discuss this campaign in the detail that I discussed the other one because for the 1st Brigade, which I have data on, since the French put their records on the web, I don't have good records for what happened in there. And who knows, maybe Rene Martel took them all anyway. Okay. So, what do we need to finish the research? In other words, how do we prove or disprove whether French air power was crucial in the Battle of the Santerre? The first thing we need is German records. They were opposing, the French 1st Aerial Brigade was opposing the German 18th and 7th Armies. And the question is, do the German records of those, if any of them still exist, if they survived the bombing of World War II, do they say anything about air attacks, making it difficult for them? Do generals' memoirs say anything? Do the diaries or memoirs of common soldiers shed any light? It turns out after I wrote this, a couple days ago, I was actually able to find a reference to air power in General von Ludendorff's memoirs. He said nothing about the retreat of his armies in August 1918 that related to aircraft. He mentioned tanks a lot. He mentioned the demoralization of his army that took place after August 8th, the Black Day of the German Army. But he didn't talk about aircraft. However, when he talks about the Second Battle of the Marne, middle of July, he mentions artillery and aircraft destroying the bridges, making it impossible to support the troops coming across. So there is possibly a real good case for air power making a difference there that isn't acknowledged in Gremon. Finally, French records may be useful. The 1st Brigade was supporting, we know who they were supporting. They were supporting the 1st and 3rd Armies early in the month, and the 10th Army late in the month. Do their records say anything? Don't know the answer to that. I did find out, all this stuff is happening at once. I did find out a few days ago that you can find online the reprints of the French official history for their army. It's thousands and thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of pages in all. And so maybe there's something in there, and maybe it's very accessible. So, I'll take your questions.